What's up, y'all? Welcome to At the End of the Day podcast. I'm your host, Cherie, and I hope you've been having a great day so far. Before we get into the topic for today's episode, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button so you can be notified of all the new episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment. I love hearing from you guys. And for weekly encouragement, make sure you follow me on Instagram and TikTok under the name ATEOTD Podcast. And as I always say, if you know someone that needs encouragement or is just going through it, make sure you share this episode with them because you just never know what somebody's going through. So the topic for this episode is a continuation and like the cherry on top to the last two episodes I did. So 2 episodes ago, I did Reveal to Heal, where I talked about the importance of healing and honesty. The last episode I did was Is Your Praise Unconditional, where I talked about how we tend to put conditions on our praise. So if this is your first time tuning in, you should definitely check them out. So the topic for this episode was birthed out of the series It Had to Happen This Way by Pastor John F. Hanna. So first off, I just want to start by saying I love Pastor Hanna. Okay, like I could literally watch that man preach 1,000 times. And I do plan to make it to Chicago to watch him preach in person, okay? Because he is hilarious. And even though he's hilarious and will have you like bent over holding your stomach laughing, he also goes ahead and challenges you to think deeper and bigger about your relationship with God. And I can't emphasize enough how much he truly has impacted my relationship with God in such a positive way. So if you haven't listened to him, make sure you check him out. So in this series, he pretty much talked about how God allowed everything to happen in your life for a reason, the good and the bad. And he also talked about how strategic God is with using what it is that we have going through. The whole series really caused me to reflect and change my own perspective about a lot of things that have happened in my life. The series made me realize that we tend to omit certain things that have happened in our life because we don't like that they happened. But the truth is, it's all a part of the process. So on today's episode, I will talk about embracing the process. So let's intentionally grow our garden. So where do you think we're going to start at first? That's right. You should already know. We about to start at the definitions because why? I love my definitions. And y'all know, honestly, that they help y'all get the real understanding of the entire episode. Don't even play. Y'all know that. Okay, so we're going to start at the definitions. The definition of process by Oxford Languages Dictionary is a series of actions or steps taken in order to achieve a particular end. So in other words, it takes a series of things to get us to where we need to be. It could be a series of good things. It could be a series of bad things. Regardless of that, all of them work together to get us to where we need to be. And quite frankly, we all know that makes sense because of Romans 8:28, where it says, all things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. We can't go where we want to go without going through a process. And we can't become who God wants us to become without going through a process. Without the process, there will be a mess because you're pretty much skipping steps. Whether it looks like it or not, so much is happening in the process. A prime example of not skipping the process is baking a cake. Now, I have heard this analogy be taught by several different pastors in their sermons. So I'm going to share the analogy with y'all. But you already know I'm going to put my little spin on it. Okay, so imagine you're about to bake a cake. So you have all your ingredients. You got your flour, you got your sugar, milk, eggs, butter, etc. Each ingredient serves its own purpose in the process. The flour, sugar, and milk are going through the process of being measured to move from one container to the next. And that's pretty much the same way God goes ahead and moves us from our area of comfortability to new territory. The eggs are going through the cracking process so we can use what's inside. God does the same thing with us when he allows certain things to happen so we can go through the breaking process. Because sometimes we can't go into our next or go into who it is that God has called us to be in the same form that we're in. Sometimes a breaking has to happen. Sometimes we have to go through a breaking so we can get to the root of who we are, so God can create a new and better version of ourselves. Then there is a mixing that happens. The eggs are going through a beating process that literally makes it thin enough to mix with the other ingredients. Once the mixing is done, you can't tell what went into the bowl. So you can't tell how much flour you went ahead and weighed. You can't tell how much sugar you went ahead and weighed. You can't tell how much milk you put in there, how many eggs you put in there. Everything looks like one. All of it works together to create a new form. So now you have cake batter. So after the mixing happens, you have to take that cake batter and put it into a pan. From there, the cake mixture has to go through the baking process. And even though you can't see each ingredient individually, what we do know is that the heat from the oven is causing each ingredient to do what needs to be done in order for us to get a cake, right? And the same goes for us as we go through different steps of a process. Stay with me. Then you have to allow the cake to sit in the oven for a certain amount of time. Too early and that cake ain't going to taste right. It's just not. Okay? And if you go ahead and leave it in too late, it's just going to be extremely dry and possibly even burnt. And if you're anything like my mom when she makes her 7-Up cake, when she does that, can't nobody move in the house. Because if you go ahead and have too much movement, boom, the cake going to fall. That cake has to sit in that baking process. No other disturbances can happen. And the timing of taking it out is crucial. So when the cake comes out, at that point you think, boom, it's cool. We got a cake. Life is great. But no. The cake also has to go through a cooling process. And then you go ahead, put that icing on it, and it's done. So what am I saying? When we look at a cake, all we see is the finished product. We don't see each ingredient that went in there or the process the cake went through to get to what we're looking at. No. All we see is a cake with icing on it. That's it. Whatever that cake went through to become a cake, cool. But we don't see the process or each ingredient by looking at it. When looking at a cake, we may not be able to see each ingredient, but we know it's in there. We also know that each ingredient served its own purpose to get us that cake. And how do we know? Because without certain ingredients, you wouldn't have a cake. Without the flour, that cake's not rising. Okay? Without milk, butter, that cake is going to be dry. Yep, dry. Without the sugar, that cake is not going to be sweet at all. So the same way each ingredient served a purpose to get us to a cake, the same goes for us with every process it is that we go through. As we go through each step of the process, people can't tell what you've been through just by looking at you. And that's because each step of the process worked together to create a new version of you. So I want you to know that whatever you're going through right now, it's serving a purpose and is a part of the process for God to get you to where He needs you to be. So when I think about embracing a process, there are two people I tend to think about, okay? One is from the Bible and one is not from the Bible. I'm not even going to ask y'all to guess who because there's a lot of people I'm sure y'all can think of. But I'm going to share the first person and they are not in the Bible. Not in the Bible. The first person is Sha'Carri Richardson. She is an American track and field sprinter. Now, in the past 5 years, she has experienced many highs and lows. And if you don't know what I mean, I'm going to, get into it a little bit. In 2019, as a freshman, she ran the 100 meters in 10.75 seconds. So this caused her to break the collegiate record at the NCAA Division I championships. Now, that made her one of 10 of the fastest women in history. Not just the world, history. Can you imagine being that young making history? That's very impressive. In April of 2021, she ran a new personal best of 10.72 seconds. So that made her the sixth fastest woman of all time at that time. And it also made her the fourth fastest American woman in history. She later qualified for the 2020 Olympics, running the 100 meter in 10.86 seconds. But she was ineligible for the 100 meter due to her testing positive for cannabis. When asked about it, she pretty much said that she took the drug to cope with qualifying for the Olympics and for mourning the death of her mother. Now, even though she wasn't eligible for the 100 meters, she still could have been chosen for the 4x100 relay for the women's in the Olympics, but she was not selected. And at that point, it just seems like one low moment after another after another. She already was going through a lot, and it just seemed like just another thing happens a few months later when she does a race, and she ends up coming in last place with a time of 11.14 seconds. But then on July 7th, 2023, she became the U.S. national champion in the women's 100 meter for USA Outdoor Track and Field Championship, running 10.82 seconds. Okay? Now, her winning that qualified her for the 2023 World Athletics Championships. So the third day of the 2023 World Athletic Championships, she won gold in the 100-meter race with a time of 10.65 seconds. Wow. Then last month, June of 2024, she went ahead and qualified for the women's 100-meter final with a time of 10.71 seconds, which was not only fast for her, but also ended up being a world record. And that qualified her for the 2024 Olympics in Paris. I'm saying all this to say that she went through a process. Her goal was to make it to the Olympics, of course. I'm sure if she could have it her way, she would have made the team in 2020. She would have gone ahead and competed in the 2020 Olympics and won. Simple as that. But God had other plans. There was a process that he wanted her to go through. And again, God doesn't let us just go through anything for no reason. So there's a reason why he had her go through that process. People go ahead and see where she is now, but they don't realize that she went through a process that God deemed necessary for her. The process transformed her, but it also helped make her better. And to be honest, she even said it in an interview when she said, I am not worried about the world anymore. I've seen the world be my friend. I've seen the world turn on me. It's my time to actually do it for myself. Had she not gone through the highs and lows that God made her go through, she would have never gained that perspective of the world's approval the way she did. It was the high moments that allowed her to see the world love her, but it was also the low moments that allowed her to see the world switch up on her. And the process helped her find her why. And now that she's doing it for herself, there's nothing and nobody that can stop her. A process isn't easy, but it's necessary. And there's always something to learn in the process. And the second person that comes to mind when thinking about embracing the process is Esther. And yes, we're about to have a quick Bible study session, so get ready. Okay, you already know what's up. So let's start. So King Xerxes had a banquet for all the nobles and officials. Queen Vashti had a banquet for all the women in the royal palace. So there comes a moment where the king wants the queen to come see him, right? Not just because he goes ahead and misses her, but because he wants all the men to stare. Yes, I know. But let's all remember we're talking about the Bible. It's not 2024, okay? So yes, the king wanted the queen to come see him so the other men could go ahead and gaze at her beauty. Now, Queen Vashti, even though it was in the Bible, she clearly was living in 2024 because she refused to come. She was like, let him know I'm not coming to the servants. Like, I'm not coming. Yeah, no bueno. Now, her turning the king down, he was livid. He was like, who is she talking to? Heavy on the who is she talking to. You know what I'm saying? So he goes ahead and meets with his wise advisor about the fact that his wife, aka the queen, just got done disrespecting him. Okay? So the wise advisors are really stressed, right? They're like, oh no. If she's out here doing that now, I can't even imagine what these women are going to do out in the village if they find out about that. And on top of that, if these other queens find out about your queen doing that to you, they're going to start disrespecting their kings. Now, I think that's a little wild to be making all these assumptions over one note. But again, I had to remind myself too, and I read it, that this is the Bible. It's not 2024. Okay. So they ended up suggesting that the king write a decree that goes ahead and banishes Queen Vashti from the palace altogether, and that he go ahead and get a new queen. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, wow, all of that over a no. And yes, I thought the same thing when I read it. I mean, let's be honest. They were scared she was about to start a revolution. Okay? Like, heavy on the Kirk Franklin revolution. Like, key that song in this moment. Because that's what they were scared about. They was like, that woman is about to start a whole movement out here. And none of these women are about to listen to their husbands ever again. And we can't have that at a time like this. So she's got to go. Gotta go. So then in the book of Esther, we get introduced to a man named Mordecai. I just want to say that the name alone makes it sound like he mean business. Okay? Because I don't know nobody else named Mordecai, but the man sound like he mean business just from the name alone. Okay? So Mordecai has a cousin named Esther who he ended up raising as one of his own after her mother and father died. So you need to understand that Esther was gorgeous. So when it came down to them looking for a new queen, she was one of the people that definitely ended up at the king's palace because she was gorgeous. So she went there to determine whether or not she was gorgeous enough to be the next queen, and whether or not she would be a good fit for the king. Now, while she was there, she did not share her nationality or her background because Mordecai forbade her from doing it. So when Esther got there, the king's people liked her. So they immediately started her on her beauty treatments, special foods, and moved her in with servants. Now, at this point, she still hasn't met the king because before she can, she has to go through 12 months of treatment. Yep. I said 12 months of treatment. So she has to do 6 months treatments with oil of myrrh. And then she had to do another 6 months of treatments with perfumes and cosmetics. So I just want to pause right there because ain't that a little crazy? You know, like she got to go through a whole year of treatments before she could see the king. And not even treatments of like, oh, let's educate you. Let's give you etiquette lessons. Like they didn't care if she was smart or dumb. They didn't care. They just cared that she was oiled up, smelled good, and looked good. Like, that is crazy. I was definitely taken aback when I read that, okay? But let's get back to it. So Esther ends up meeting the king. He immediately feels like he is more attracted to her than any of the women that are at the palace. So Esther ends up winning his favor and he crowns her queen over Queen Vashti. So boom, Esther is queen now. We got what we came for, right? So you figured they lived happily ever after, right? Wrong. Just wrong. Nope. The story, we talking about the Bible. So y'all should have known that the story didn't stop there. Like, why would God go ahead and have a whole book of Esther just to go ahead and talk about her becoming queen and then leaving it at that? No. It's the Bible. There's going to be some more tea that goes with it. All right. So there's a part in the book of Esther where we're introduced to a man named Haman. So Haman is someone that the king decides to honor. So due to the king honoring Haman, all royal officials were to kneel in honor when they saw him. Now, Mordecai was always at the gate because he always wanted to make sure Esther was good. But when he saw Haman, he refused to kneel. And this drove Haman crazy. He was so mad that he decided to kill all the Jews. Okay? And because for him, killing Mordecai was just not enough. He was like, I need to kill Mordecai and his people. Killing Mordecai is just not going to do it for me. Okay? So I think we can all agree and say that Haman was mad. Like, he was a category mad all by himself. So Haman goes to the king and pretty much lets the king know of his plan without directly saying, I'm planning to kill all the Jews. And the king's listening to the plan. He's like, yeah, I mean, go for it. Cool with me. So I just want to make a note that he indirectly described the Jews to the king by saying, there is a certain group of people scattered. Now that is so vague. Like, the group of people he was referring to was the Jews. Like, what? So a decree was sent out by Haman in the name of the king that on a certain day of a certain month, all the Jews were to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated everywhere. Mordecai learned about the decree and was outraged. He immediately tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and headed straight to the king's gate. But since he had on sackcloth, he couldn't go past the king's gate because it was a rule that people were not allowed in with sackcloth. So Esther found out about Mordecai and immediately sent him clothes to change into. But Mordecai refused, okay? He was like, no, I'm not changing my clothes. So once he refused, Esther went ahead and sent somebody to find out what was going on with Mordecai. So he told the person everything about the decree and instructed that person to let Esther know that she needs to pretty much sit with the king at this point and put a stop to all of this. So Esther receives the information and then sends the person back to let Mordecai know that there's an entire law that states that anybody that goes to the king without being summoned by the king will be killed immediately. I'm sorry, y'all, but I gotta pause again. So you mean to tell me that a simple pop-up on the king meant death? That's wild. And you know y'all was thinking it too. That's wild. And to be honest, I understood Esther's hesitation. When Mordecai received her response, he felt the need to remind her who she is. In Esther chapter 4, verse 14, he said, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Now, even though he was checking her, I love the part where he says, and who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. In other words, your beauty got you into the palace, but you were sent here to do more. And I like to think that in a way, he was encouraging her in that moment with that statement, because he was pretty much reminding her that she was placed there with a purpose. And maybe, just maybe, that purpose was for this very moment where she would have the opportunity to save her people. And he was also reminding her that there was a purpose in the process. So Esther hears his reply and sends a response to Mordecai that she wants all of the people to go ahead and fast for 3 days with no food and no water. She also let him know that she will be doing the fast along with her attendants, and that after the 3 days are up, she will go to the king. And she said in Esther 4, verse 16, she said, when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai carried out all of Esther's instructions. On the 3rd day, Esther went to go see the king, and when the king saw her, he was pleased and welcomed her in. When Esther entered the room in Esther 5, verse 3, he said, what is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you. My God. What? When I read that part, I was so relieved, because that thing could have went sideways. Okay? Like a whole nother outcome. And we all know that other outcome could have been. But it wasn't. Because why? But God. Okay? Don't get me to shout. So I'm going to stop here because there's so many things that happen in the rest of the book of Esther. Now, I will tell you that the king ends up putting a stop to Haman's plan because Esther ends up exposing him to the king. And if you have time, you should read the book of Esther because it's only 10 chapters. And I just pretty much got y'all up to the first 5. Okay? So you're welcome. Now, why did I share all this? Because Esther endured a process to become queen. To be honest, they could have just gone ahead and put a crown on her head. Because, I mean, she was cute. He was attracted to her. What else was there for them to see? But they decided to have her go through a process. Receiving the title queen was pretty much the end goal for Esther and Mordecai. That was it. That was considered the end of the process. But again, God had other plans. He saw Esther as more than just a pretty face. He had a plan for her life, the same way God has a plan for our life. Esther became queen, but you can't just get a title just to have a title. There are responsibilities that come with certain titles. Esther endured a process to save her people. She could have gone to the king the same day that she heard about Haman's decree, but she didn't. Instead, she decided to go through the process of fasting. Her decision to fast was her waiting, and her decision to fast was her welcoming God into her situation. Now, most people would see her action of fasting as her ability to eat and drink being taken away from her. But they don't realize that it's in the lack of eating and drinking where she's actually gaining something. She gained the courage to go to the king even though there was a law saying that she couldn't. She also strengthened her faith in God. She had trust that God had her back no matter the outcome. And it's through the fast that she completely submitted to God's will for her life. Because let's be honest, she had no certainty that she wouldn't be killed. But she had enough faith in God's plan for her life that she was willing to go in that room anyway. Esther's process wasn't just about her. She was able to save the Jews because of her process. So in other words, there are people depending on you to make it through your process. Sha'Carri and Esther both went through a process and came out better than when they went in. Sha'Carri will be in the Olympics at the end of this month. And Esther learned that she was more than just a beautiful woman wearing a crown. God revealed to both of them a version of themselves that they didn't know existed. People don't realize that a process is not designed to go straight from the beginning to the end. A process is designed by God to have highs and lows. Because the highs and lows produce strength, character, and wisdom if you allow it. Now, guess what, y'all? That's right. It's Q&S time. Q&S stands for quote in scripture. This is time I set aside in the episode to share a quote in scripture with you to encourage you throughout the week ahead. The quote I chose for this week is from Kobe Bryant. And he said, "The mindset isn't about seeking a result. It's about the process of getting to that result. It's about the journey and the approach. It's a way of life." I do think that it's important in all endeavors to have that mentality. Many of us want to start at the beginning, skip the steps of the process in the middle, and then just enjoy the end result. But you can't skip the process. Now I understand that the process is uncomfortable, it's frustrating, and it's filled with uncertainty, but it is necessary. So many people want to skip over the process because of how they view the process, right? They tend to view the process as taking too long or something that is blocking them from getting to their end result. And most importantly, they view the process as requiring too much effort and energy. But the process is mandatory, so you have to change your mindset about it. Don't run from the process. Instead, embrace it. Because too many great things are happening during the process. Really think about it. The process is helping you get to your end result. During the process, you are being transformed for the better. And it may feel like things are being taken away from you, but they aren't. Everything is happening to help you through the process and to make you better. I just really want you to understand that the process is not a punishment. Instead, I want you to view the process as an opportunity to learn and grow before you get to your end result. And I want you to realize that it isn't you against the process, because you and the process are actually on the same team. So stop trying to get rid of it, skip over it, and ignore it. So I want you to accept the process, change your mindset, and learn from it. Because without it, you will never get the end result you want or that God has for you. Now, the scripture I chose for this week is from Philippians chapter 1, verse 6. I'm reading from the New Living Translation, and it reads, "And I am certain that God, who began the good work within you, will continue his work until it is finally finished on the day when Christ Jesus returns." So in other words, if God started the process and you're still in that process, you can rest assured that God has an end planned for that process. And I get it. When we're enduring a process, it feels like it is taking forever to get to the end result. And it's easy to become discouraged by the process because you're working hard, you're trying to stay patient, you're holding on to faith that the end result is near, but at the same time, days are going by and you're still in the process. You have to remember that God always has a plan and that the Lord always finishes what he started. The Lord leaves nothing incomplete. He had you start the process and he will have you complete the process at the time that he sees fit. The Lord wastes nothing. We know that he's intentional. So we also know that he has you enduring a process for a reason. And if he still has you in a process, ask him what it is that he wants you to learn. In the quote I chose for this week, I spoke about the importance of your mindset in the process. If you view still being in the process as something that God still wants you to learn instead of viewing it as a punishment, that's when you'd be able to graduate from being in the process to finally receiving everything it is that God has for you. And before you go, I want you to understand that it's always going to come down to the fact that we can't control the process. We just can't. As much as we would love to, we can't. And ultimately, God is the only person that is in control of the process. We may experience high moments and we may experience low moments. And at the end of the day, it may look like a roller coaster. Okay? But regardless of what it looks like, God still is in control of the process. God is still in control of the plan. The only thing we can control about the process is what we decide to learn from the process. And having a negative mindset will cause you to learn nothing. And I'm a firm believer that if God has you go through something and you didn't learn from it the first time, he'll have you go through the same thing over and over and over again until you learn what it is that he wanted you to learn from the beginning. There are a lot of good things that come from going through a process. You just have to choose to see it. During the process, you're becoming stronger spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally. You're also becoming wiser. And you're becoming more confident. God does everything for a reason. So if he has you in a process, you need to trust that it's all a part of his plan to get you to where he needs you to be. So at the end of the day, respect the process.
I know what you're telling me the truth. I'd rather have all your weight removed. You wonder why I don't let you in, because I got better things to do. Better things. Better things. Moving on to bigger and better things. Been through the worst, I need better things. If you knew better.